Hello, I'm Craig Constantine. Are you passionate about creating amazing podcasts? Terrific. You are in the right place. Welcome to Pod Talk, short conversations with podcast creators that are not just about podcasting, because I like to take the scenic route. My guest today is Suzi Nou. Welcome, Suzi. How are you?
I'm well, thanks, Craig. Thanks for having me on today.
Oh, my pleasure. So many things. And I always have problems deciding what to talk about because usually the last thing I did was listen to one of your episodes. So your episodes are a little technical.
Very technical. Not all of them, I should say. Not all of them.
Oh, okay. So the ones that I skipped through and the one that I listened to was very technical. And quite honestly, it was, do you know how long it was? I think it was like 35 minutes, 37 minutes. I actually listened to it at single speed. That's how I like for reals from the beginning to the end. And it's about anesthesia, anesthesiologists. And this particular one was about anaphylactic challenge testing. Is that how you would put that?
That's right. I feel like you're sitting an exam when you're saying it like that.
I don't know why I found it. I do know why I found it so interesting because you're interesting to listen to. And I want to talk a little bit about kind of where you come from when you're asking questions and the way you think. Your guest was, trying to curse, a freaking font of detail and knowledge. It was like,
wasn't he brilliant?
He was like, okay, so I basically invented all this stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I love getting to the source like that. It's incredible, isn't it?
And you asked him at one point in the show, you asked him a question. I'll link it in the episode notes if people want to listen. It's fun. But at one point you asked him, and I think you said, asking as if I'm 5. Yes. And then you asked him a question that was not a 5-year-old question. It was like, when you're in this drug with them, it was like a complicated thing. But I don't want to say I was fascinated, but I really loved the honesty. Like you and I were talking before about how much of oneself appears in the show. People won't up to you and say, like, I feel like I know you. And you're like, really? I've never met you before.
Yeah.
And I think that your attitude about how you approach creating the show, how you approach learning and how that happens in the show, I think that's not unique, but definitely special. And that's like a really cool thing.
Thank you.
I'm going to guess the answers that I know the answer to this, but have you always been that way, or did that really like blossom in podcasting, or?
Both, I think. I think I naturally have a bit of a curious mindset. I've always had a learner mindset. And I think if you come from a position of wanting to learn, you can't by then come from a position of being arrogant. If you assume you know everything, you've lost that opportunity. You close that door, right?
Yeah.
But I do think that it's grown. It's perhaps become more sophisticated as I've become a podcaster because you're listening back to yourself. And at first, you have those moments of, I think in that instance during that podcast, I'm thinking, I really think I should know the answer to this question. So if I just frame it as, I'm asking this as a 5-year-old, not as a specialist anaesthetist who actually, has like got too many degrees and too many letters after my name. I'm not asking as that person. There's a little bit of, I think, covering my backside in case people are going, but you should know that information.
Yeah. Well, and first of all, your guest was really good. Your guest did not do that at all. Your guest was just like, oh, that's actually a good point. Let's unpack that. I'm thinking, I'm not a big American baseball fan, but I do remember when you listen to those radio, sorry, I just gave away my age. When you listen to those radio programs, the announcing was usually a team and there were 2 people. So there'd be like one guy like, and there he goes around in the base. The second, it's like really just like they're calling it. And then there's like somebody else who had all they used to call him the color man, misogynistic, but okay. They used to call this person in charge of the color and their job was to fill in and make the thing more interesting. And I think asking really simple questions, like, I'm just asking for a friend, but like, how does that really work? It like sets up the frame where there's nothing wrong with, is everybody on the same page? Like, are we all understanding? And you made a comment about, I can kind of like half remember, you made a comment about the testing times for something. And like, it used to be 1, now it's like every hour, every 4 hours.
The tryptase testing times. Yeah,
right. Exactly. That thing. But you said like, it was like one thing when I went to school and now they changed it. And I'm like, that's brilliant. I don't know what that is, but
Yeah.
it sounded really important. It sounded important that it be
Yes.
done and that it work.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, if there are other anesthesiologists, I knew this was going to be a challenging episode. If there are other anesthesiologists listening, they might not have caught that memo. And, that little split second, asking like a 5-year-old, is really like an honest way to do it. So you nailed that when you were saying about, being honest about curiosity.
Oh, thank you. I'd like to say that I came up with it, but of course I didn't. I think I picked it up from listening to another podcast. So yeah, but I think you raise a good point there that, what I love about medicine, but also what is kind of frightening about medicine is that it changes all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to stay up to date. You don't want to be the one, especially in something like anaphylaxis, which can be life-threatening, right? A friend of mine tragically lost his son to anaphylaxis a few years ago. Did a tragic, one of my saddest episodes was chatting with him about that incident.
Number 78, I think it was. Sorry.
Well
talking
done.
about that. Well, it helps. It's all fresh in my mind.
So hard, for me not to cry during that episode, and especially because he's been a good friend of mine, or a friend of mine since university days. But coming back to what you were saying before, that I think when you first qualify, for us, we've just sat our exams. We are on top of the world knowledge-wise. You throw any emergency at us and we will nail it. And it's a great feeling. And as you go through your career, medicine advances. And not just medicine, I'd imagine this would be in many other fields.
Right.
And you get to this point, I'm sort of in the middle now. I can kind of remember that exam still. I still get post-traumatic stress, as everyone does, talking about their exams. But I can see, there potentially is going to be a time when I'm not going to be working so much. And I can see now, I work with trainees as they're coming through, but I've also got lots of colleagues who are retiring. A lot of my former bosses are looking at retirement or started to retire. So you can see that perhaps there is this breadth of what people recall, what people know. Medicine has advanced. They might be stuck in their practice that they were doing 5-10 years ago with that technique because it works for them. It works really well. And I don't want to say it's a bad technique, but there's newer techniques coming through. And those new techniques work really well in the hands of those people learning them and practicing them regularly. Mm-hmm. But, when I'm trying to think about my audience, I'm trying to take everybody as much as I can along for the ride. And I also have in mind that non-anaesthetists are listening to my podcast.
Clearly.
Non-medical people, clearly. And I'm very grateful, non-doctors, non-medical people. And I'm always wondering, how, especially with this episode, you picked probably one of the most technical episodes ever, but how do people go with the terminology, the concepts, and hopefully, you tell me, maybe the technology, maybe some of the technical terms might have been a bit, hard to grasp, but you're mastering them.
But I don't think you blew by any of them. But I was only listening at single speed. That wouldn't have worked sped up. No way.
That to me is a real compliment, being listened to on single speed. But maybe one of the takeaways is actually there's a lot of nuance that goes into this. There's a lot that even the experts are dealing with. And if I'm ever in a similar situation, or my friend asking for a friend, my daughter, my family members, they have an episode of anaphylaxis, or, we all, do we all know someone who's got a kid with a peanut allergy? Maybe there's something in there that they can take away and go, that's why medicine isn't always so black and white,
It occurs to me, we probably should unpack what anaphylaxis is. I'll let you do it.
Well, the one I'm thinking about, there's many types of anaphylaxis, or there's many types of allergic reactions, I should say. But anaphylaxis is the severe type of allergic reaction, the life-threatening one. So yeah, usually people will get it. It's usually commonly in the community, people will eat something like peanuts and they'll get a swollen tongue, swollen eyes, a rash, start to feel really terrible, can't breathe. And the worst thing that can happen is that you go into cardiac arrest. And as I said, my friend lost his son. He died from it.
Maybe that's
anyway, on that cheerful note.
Nice. But I was thinking maybe that's what drew me in, was that it somehow felt like, I'm just like thinking, this is how you get in trouble, just talking without thinking. It felt like what you guys were discussing, like, I I have a friend who's a first line fire responder in the city of London.
Yeah.
And he's got a wife and a kid, and he puts on the suit and goes into buildings. And when I talked to him on a podcast, he was talking about there's a curtain. There's what everybody sees, and then there's just this little piece of material. And when you peel the curtain back, then you're in the world of the first responders and the fires and the EMT and the police. And maybe you hear the siren when you're in the city.
Yeah.
But he's it's this whole other world behind this curtain. And maybe what I liked about the episode was I felt like you guys had opened the curtain and it was okay. I'm I'm gonna stand in the operating theater today and I'm not gonna touch anything, but I'm just watching. And I enjoyed the way that you approach. You clearly created an environment. You probably knew the person well enough to know what you would get when you talk to him, but you created this environment where it's it's okay to ask 5-year-old questions here.
Yeah.
Are we talking about podcasting? Because it feels like that entire conversation we just had also is exactly the same for people who are doing podcasts.
Yeah. I agree. I've often said when I first started podcasting, the space I want to exist in is that gray zone. If it's black and white, you can read it. In my case, in my workplace, it's a policy document. You read it. Here's the situation. You read it. You got it. Okay, fine. When this happens, I do X, Y, Z. And it's black and white. But podcasting, I think, where the magic is when it's not black and white and you can dive into it. And you've got to, coming back to what we were talking about before, you've got to take a little bit of yourself in there with you. Because it's not this black and white document that exists on some server somewhere that you download so you can follow the instruction manual.
I'm wondering. So you mentioned, I think we were recording when you said it. You mentioned that you're often encountering people who are coming through on rotations, or students doing post. However you do that,
We get trainees rotating through our hospitals. Yeah, residencies. I think you call
residencies
it in the US. Yes,
that's right. I have a word for that.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you're regularly seeing this turn of residents. Do you feel like, I don't want to say, what have you learned from podcasting that's applied to helping residents? What I'm wondering is, it sounds like you've really changed the way you look at asking questions, and maybe even how you see other people asking questions. That might lead you to you could ask your questions better, or the Eastern emptier teacup would be a better attitude. I'm just wondering how maybe how podcasting has changed you, how that may have colored how you're interacting with residents. Or I could be completely off the end of the diving board. I don't know.
No, I think it not only just residents, but patients as well. So I think there's a few things there. I think, people talk about active listening, and we all go, yeah. We all know active listening.
Which is literally not active listening. Yeah. I got it.
I got that. But I find to be, I hope, a good interviewer. You've got to be in that moment with your guest and actively listening. And you're not thinking about the next question that you're going to ask. You're really I am anyway, trying to listen to what are they telling me? Not just the words I'm hearing, but what else am I feeling and hearing in their words? And then what you don't hear is I ask the question, I often ask it twice. I ask it the mumbled first time. Blah, 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 blah.
Right.
And then I ask the slick version, and the slick version makes it into the podcast. And so my poor trainees come to me and they're saying, wow, you're just so efficient. You don't mention, you don't do
There's not an inside.
Well, you didn't hear the first version of the question, did you? Power of editing. But I do think, as I've edited my podcast and I listen to myself, you then become more critical of yourself.
Absolutely.
And that's what we give people. That's one tip for job interviews. We say record yourself. When everyone was doing online job interviews, it was it's going to be uncomfortable, but record yourself doing an online job interview. Go back and watch yourself, and you are your hardest critic.
Make sure you have a teddy bear, because it's hard. Yeah.
And that first hurdle when you first start podcasting of, oh my God, is that what my voice sounds like?
Oh, that's what I sound like? Yes, exactly.
I can really sell it. Yeah. So, you kind of, I think you still get critical, and therefore you do become a better question asker. And I think that makes me better in the moment with my trainees. I'm looking for those moments. Not just listening to them now because I've got to supervise them from all manner of things. They're sticking needles in people. They're doing invasive procedures. I'm looking at the whole thing and I'm looking at what in this moment do I want this trainee to take away as feedback or questions. And the same with my patients. We have this opportunity. People joke that you go into anesthesia because you don't like talking to people. And I say it's the opposite. I say it's there because you have to love connecting with people, I think. And I've had, I don't want to blow my own horn here, but I had one tech I'd never worked with. We have theatre techs that help us move equipment and help us move patients around. And after a couple of patients, I'd never worked with him before, he said, "You are the best anaesthetist I've ever worked with." And it wasn't to do with, he had no idea what drugs I was giving, what my, physical, did I miss my drips or whatever. And I think he just loved the way I connected with my patients in those, it is literally maybe in some instances 3 minutes that I have with someone. And it's to kind of, you're going in for surgery. This is a big day for you. It's huge. You're going to remember this event. Whereas, I can't remember the anesthetic I gave 2 weeks ago. I give, thousands a year, it feels like. So
that's why we write it down. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So I have these few precious moments to connect with you, to work out where you're at, and to tailor my conversation to you. Yeah, it's similar themes. I can only reinvent 500 conversations so many times, but I like to think that that's a really important moment, and I'd like to think that perhaps through podcasting, I've actually gotten better with that.
I think I was just thinking when you mentioned listening back to your own work, I tend to say the word "so" a lot as a conjunction. I start sentences. I say, "So that makes me think." And I have team members who at one point swore they were going to make the so. They were just going to edit together all of my sayings. They're like, we wouldn't have to change the pitches. We could just find one for every pitch. And then I did set out going, all right, if it's that much of a thing, then it's probably a verbal tic I should remove. But eventually I sort of realized that, yeah, this is who I am. I'm a little funny. I'm a little weird. So I just kind of let it play out.
Be proud of it, Craig. It is so funny. I think you must have been listening to my conversation. I came home from work. I was driving home from work yesterday and I listened to the start of 3 podcasts on the way home. And I was telling my family.
Of your own or somebody else's?
Someone else's. And I got home late, so I had very brief time with my family, and they, we have this sort of ritual of asking, so, how was your day? What did you fail at? What do you think you learnt? And I said, I failed. I didn't stick it out with these first 2 podcasts. And I said, because, what I learned is I'm pretty fussy. And I explained why I didn't like the first 2. And on the way, as I was dropping my daughter off this morning, she said, "Mummy, can you explain again why you didn't like the first one?" First one was easy. So volume, up, down, up, down, up, down between the guests. I said, golden rule of podcasting. Can't touch the volume dial more than twice per episode.
Yeah, or fix it in post. You're like, yeah, right.
Exactly. There's post. And I explained to her what EQ. I said, she goes, how do you fix that? I said, well, in a simple word, EQ. And she goes, what's EQ? And I said, my 5-year-old, because she's literally not much older than 5, answer to what EQ. And I know, we all know there's lots more other buttons you can press,
Sure.
But then the next one, coming back to what you were saying, I said there was too much waffle. She said, what's waffle, Mum? And I thought about it. So, I'm riding my bike. We're having this conversation. We're riding my bike on the way to childcare. And I said, okay, so I could ask you, how's your day? And then I said, or I could ask you, so how's your day? Or I could ask you, so I was really wondering, it's made me really think about, I wanted to find out, how's your day?
Yep.
So, and I gave her the first example. I said, that's to the point, but do you get something else by me saying, so how's your day? I said, everyone's got their own taste. Sometimes it is a bit of a how's your day, but sometimes bringing something else with your so is it, or whatever conjunction. Is it a conjunction? I'll use conjunction because that's what you labelled it as. I'm bad on grammar. Maybe that adds maybe those words add. that maybe too much of the words and then going, well, I'm really thinking, and
I'm not reaching for my web browser. I'm not reaching for my web browser.
Resist the urge. All the grammar freaks out there, please correct Craig and I.
No. Take a long walk off a short email. No. Yeah, I find so I've been doing this long enough that I'm nowhere near done like learning, but I've like made some, that's an egregious, like, I did that at how many episodes? And I really think it's helpful to get, I'm going to say skewered, like listen to an episode and go, I'm listening to myself and I'm thinking, dude, shut up. Now, one might wonder, why didn't you edit it out, Craig? But that's a different thing. A lot of times I like to listen to, back then I was listening to the raw recordings and then a finished edited recording. But I really think the squirm, like that's uncomfortable, and you're doing the stress sweat, I think that's really helpful for learning. I don't know that that's the best way for everybody to learn everything, but when it's me doing it to myself, that's a really good way for me to know this is important, brain. Like why did you have that verbal blah, 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 and then like track it down.
Yeah.
And I found that I don't know that I want to say people listening should go do that, because I really think a lot of people who listen to me, my mom, I think a lot of people who listen to me are already pretty good at podcasting. My mom actually does not listen.
I don't think my mum knows what a podcast is.
So like my mom wants to hear me.
Exactly. Yeah. She wants to use this thing called the telephone, not for text messaging. To hear your voice. Actually, have a voice call.
Fortunately, she's close enough. We usually have Sunday dinner, so usually it's like ding dong, hey.
Nice.
Yeah. All right. So now that the great thing about this is I'm like this. A lot of times I'm having conversations with people and I've never had a chance to talk to them before, but you and I have actually talked pretty much. But I'm just like, this isn't new at all. I feel like this is just another conversation with Suzi. Exactly. No surprises. But my thought that I was having is what's coming to mind for you around maybe where you're going to go with podcasting? Like, because what I was thinking was like, what's something I don't know? Like, well, what are you going to do next with podcasting? Or are you starting to feel, I don't think so, but are you starting to feel constrained creatively? Like you want to make something completely different about bicycling, or I don't know.
Oh, good questions, Craig. We mentioned briefly pod fade before
that was before we were recording too. I wasn't. Yeah. Oh, awesome! I wasn't reaching back for that, but that's a great callback.
And I think this is I think the 4th or 5th year of the podcast now, and as I said, to me the podcast is kind of reflected my career. So when I first started, it was the pandemic. I was the president of the Australian Society of Anesthetists, and I just wanted to get information out quickly. We had anesthetists around Australia emailing me, messaging me, contacting me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter when it was called Twitter.
Yeah,
I can say that. I can drop that in. Saying, what do we do? What PPE do we need? Everyone overseas is wearing N95 masks, P2 masks. I've never heard of an N95. They're getting fit tested, all these things. So much lack of information. And in my role as president, we had this great network of presidents of the other anesthesia societies, so from the US, the UK, Canada, New Zealand, South Africa, and we were meeting regularly. And I was getting great information. UK had fit testing in place. Canada had fit testing, but it had gone. We're getting all this intel, and I wanted to be able to address some of these questions, because I was getting them asked so frequently. So I think that was, the first thing you realize about podcasting is the efficiency. You can just have these informative things, and people ask you these questions, and you go back and listen to that episode. Yeah. And then if you have more questions, come back to me, and you come back into a more informed conversation. So that was the first iteration, but I'm not, thankfully, president forever. And when I transitioned, handed over the role of presidency, I thought, well, do I want to keep going? And if I do, I can't be speaking as the president. That's misleading. And in fact, someone poised out to me, my trailer still says I'm the president. I am overdue in need of an update of the trailer. Whoops, so used to just pumping out the content and not always going back and reviewing it. But I thought, by this stage, it's an incredible position, because I had met so many anaesthetists from around the world, from around Australia, And my network had just grown. I hate that word network, but, the number of people I could reach had grown. If someone, and I've had trainees come up to me and say, I'm thinking about doing my fellowship in XYZ place. But, I know one person, you don't happen to know anyone else. And for me,
Indeed I do.
2 or 3 clicks away.
Exactly.
If I know a few, and if not, I can find out a few very quickly. So I thought also within that, I thought there's, anaesthetists are quite incredible people. They're quite interesting. We have varied interests. And I really then thought the podcast is about, to me, showcasing the breadth and the depth of talent of anaesthetists in Australia. So that became, over the last few years, the big, motivation for the podcast, and the incredible support also that the ASA, the Australian Society of Anesthetists, has continued to provide me in being able to deliver the podcast. And then it's interesting, and we talked about pod fade. I'm like, is this still where I'm at? As I've left that role, is my network still as big? I'm also planning a sabbatical later this year, where I'll be hopefully based in Europe. So my geographical shift will be, location will be different, and that's where the questions of, what is this podcast still? I think podcasting won't change in that it is still a great way of connecting with people. And I think as long as I am intrigued and curious about anaesthetists in Australia, there'll be something in there that makes me want to do it. But then, in answer to your other question, what other podcasts are there? If I had all the time in the world, if I could be a full-time podcaster, what else is there? Well, I've actually got one which I love, one of my favorite ones. It's not published, and I don't know if it ever will be, but I've got one with my daughter. It's called The Podcast of Magical Animals. You can't find it. As I said, it's not published. And it's she comes, we've been doing it over the last few years, and she comes up with a magical animal. And she comes up with the name and everything. And I just ask her a few questions about it. And they're sort of like 5 to 10 minute episodes. She hasn't yet given me the permission to publish. She's not sure she wants her voice out there yet.
Fortunately, she's a minor and you're the parent, exactly. So you can just sign off on that.
But she keeps, and it's been fascinating as her imagination has grown, has developed, as her vocab has. Just, it's a great, so that, and I haven't explored the world of kids podcasting that much, but when I first looked into it, there wasn't much out there for children to listen to that was for them. And again, I think they like listening to stuff that other children have created. There was a similar one, which is what's inspired her. I think it's actually got a similar name. And she listened to a few episodes of it. That was only one series long, I think, but she listened to all the episodes a few times, and she said, is there anything else out there like this, Mummy? And I was like, I can't, on my searching, I can't find anything. So here you go. Why don't you make your own? So potentially that one.
We shall see.
Yeah.
Well, much as I hate to say it, I have no shortage of questions, but we need to stop somewhere. I guess maybe one last, so you're coming to Europe. Let's see what else comes to mind. I guess I could give it back to you. Do you have any last questions for me? Just for something completely different.
Oh, yeah. I usually love being on the interviewing side of things.
Especially when you get no warning, right?
Yeah. I was impressed on the recent pod call that we had over the weekend. You mentioned a prefix.
Oh, yes. Well, that's Craig nerding out with technology.
Well, that's what I'm curious about.
The prefixes or Craig nerding out with technology?
Craig nerding out with technology. Because I've tried listening to a few podcasts on podcast 2.0. Do you understand all of that? I kind of,
yes.
See, I thought so. I just assumed. I was like, if there's one person in this world that I know who would understand this, because I'm a bit like you. When you listen to my podcast on anaphylaxis, I listen to podcasts on podcast 2.0. And I'm like, I do
autodidact, they call that, yeah.
I'm like, gee, what all these like suffixes and people paying directly and, all this sort of stuff. I'm like,
it's interesting.
Where does this knowledge come from? Where do you get this?
I'm too dumb to stop reading. I just keep clicking and reading and clicking and reading. And the other thing is, it's do you know the phrase? It's turtles all the way down. It's like an Indian mythological. What's under the world? It's a giant turtle. Well, and then the kids go, "What's under the turtle?" Another turtle. Like it's just turtles all the way down. It's like an Indian mythological thing. I don't know where I got that, but the internet and technology, I always joke, it's just turtles all the way down. So every single piece of everything that we do for podcasting, you know that there's no magic, right? You know that if you dug far enough or look far enough, you'd find, oh, there's a piece of software that does that. Or, oh, like just like when you learn to edit software, when you learn editing, you're like, how does that work? And then you see, oh, that's actually a special skill. And then you realize there's a whole industry for that. So anybody who finds themselves completely lost, just keep doing what Suzi's doing, which is like saying, okay, so the 5-year-old question is, I don't understand how can there be a 2.0 version of podcasting? What are you talking about changing? Yeah. And then, they'll give you and like, you just keep asking those questions, but you really have to convince yourself that the world is knowable, that if I ask enough questions and get enough good answers, that I can figure this thing out. Podcasting itself is actually really simple as far as the internet goes. The internet is it complicated?
Oh my goodness.
Turtles all the way down.
I can believe that. Yeah. Interesting. I like the turtle imagery.
And people are like, what's with the podcasting 2.0 and the prefixes? We're not going to tell you because we're out of time. So
no, it's a good idea.
I'm really not going to. No, it's not. If you're really dying, you can look up how to send me an email and ask me, and I'll try and help. But in being all serious, it was terrific to get a chance to talk to you. Without feeling guilty about I should be exercising. So it was a pleasure.
No guilt intended when I do that, by the way.
No, but it's just like Suzi shows up on her bike like, hell, you schlubs, I'm ready to get
it's just I'm so time poor. It's like I love chatting to you all. I love listening more, and I know I can just look sweaty.
We love it.
At the same time. I trust you. I trust you that I can look sweaty in front of you.
I'm just janking your chain. It was terrific to talk to you, and I really appreciate you taking the time. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Craig. It's been terrific chatting with you, and I hope that you keep being curious and creative.